length. Yeah.
Thank you, Lashkan Corla. Minister, this is kind of a indirectly related question to the previous one, and it deals mainly with your role and your department in providing for greater financial inclusion, and specifically in relation to the establishment of the standard bank account and the role that the Post Office network can play in the rollout of that. And just wanted to see just where that's factoring in terms of the work that your department is doing.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, I'd like to thank the Deputy for the question. The strategy for financial inclusion, which has been led by the Department of Finance, called for the nationwide launch of a standard bank account as a first step in promoting financial inclusion. A pilot project for a standard bank account was completed in March 2013 after a 9-month pilot period. A total of 205 accounts were opened during the pilot. The report of the working group on the pilot project noted a number of reasons for the low level of take-up, including the view of stakeholders that one of the key elements required as part of the preparations for a successful national rollout of a standard bank account is greater involvement by An Post and the credit unions. The Department of Finance is currently transposing the Payment Accounts Directive, which requires that all consumers legally resident in the EU must have access to a payment account with basic features, regardless of their financial circumstances. The directive must be transposed by September 2016, and the Department of Finance is considering how to make progress on this issue in light of the experience of the Standard Bank Account pilot project. The initial report of the Post Office Network Business Development Group was presented to the Minister in May 2015. The report identified the provision of financial services, including those for the unbanked, as fundamental to the future viability of the Post Office network. There are several advantages in offering basic banking services through the Post Office network, including the trust factor and the community focus of the network. Successfully aligning these advantages with the provision of suitable basic banking products has the capacity to support both financial inclusion and enhancing the role of the Post Office network. While it is too early to indicate the context of the final report, financial services will be an important component of it. I expect the final report to be submitted to the Minister later in the autumn.
Thank you. Deputy Pringle.
Thanks, Minister. Minister, 17% of people in the country are unbanked, and that's why the financial inclusion project was put up and running. And you mentioned the pilot project in your response that was run by the Department of Finance. And the remarkable thing about that was that An Post weren't included in the pilot project, and that's why there was such a low uptake in terms of the standard payment account, is because people simply didn't trust the banks to actually open an account with them. And when you take it that those 17% of people that are unbanked, the vast majority of them are probably people in receipt of social welfare who actually use the Post Office network to get their payments. So the fact that the Post Office should be able to have the standard bank account makes perfect sense in terms of the financial inclusion and promoting financial inclusion. And unfortunately, the only ones that don't seem to see that is the government. Because you mentioned there the Post Office Development Group launched their consultation in May. On the same day that they published their 6-point consultation, the Department of Social Protection was sending out forms to people encouraging them to open bank accounts and to move away from the Post Office. So there's different government departments here working to different agendas, and there isn't a united vision across government in relation to this. And I think that's the role that your department has fallen down on, unfortunately, but you have to get a grip on, is make sure that there's a uniform response right across government.
Thank you. And, Minister.
Yeah, I mean, look, to take your last point, Deputy, in relation to a uniform response, my confidence lies in this business development group that not alone will it land on Minister White's desk, it has to land on Cabinet's and subject to discussion at Cabinet and acceptance of proposals. And it has to be uniform, it has to be united, and it has to be proactive. Unless there was no point doing this in the first place, and I'm not here as a politician to be part of a business development group that we're not serious about what we intend doing. And there has to be outcomes, be it financial, be it government intervention. And I think, you talk about trust in banking. I mean, credit unions and post offices, they're in the community, and where people in the banking sector and a lot of retired people in banks at the moment would say that the lack of community engagement, where actually bankers knew their communities, where they went out to their communities 15, 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago, they knew their people. And the credit unions and the post office know the people in their communities, and they're at an advantage now in terms of winning the trust of the public. So what we have to do, we have to build on that.
Deputy Thomas Pringle.
Yeah, there's no doubt it has to be built on, Minister, and that's what I would be worried about, is the commitment of other government departments to build on that, particularly when you think that the Department of Finance didn't even include InPost in the initial rollout and the trial project for the standard bank account, and have been dragging their heels on including them in it ever since. And, you know, when you see what the Department of Social Protection did on the day that the working group published their consultation, how are you going to get that and how are you going to achieve that within government? You know, and that's going to be the key point in relation to the success of this, and ensuring that financial inclusion takes place, and also ensuring that the post office network is protected and allowed to build and develop. And that's the big task that you have ahead of you.
Thank you. Minister, to conclude.
Yeah, okay, just briefly, look, the government commitments there for the retention of the post offices, and that's why we have a business development group. That's why Bobby Kerr was appointed. But there's no point saying you have a group if you don't do anything about it. So Bobby Kerr and all the members of the group are intent on putting proposals in front of government, because it has to feed back in and they have to be tangible. And you're right, like, I mean, even the letters going out from the Department of Social Protection did erode confidence again in the future viability of post offices, and it did create difficulties, and we need to be united. It needs to be a government approach. The government commitment's there, so it's about following through on the commitment, and that can only be done by having proposals and listing them and saying where we're going to follow through. And that's also subject to procurement as well. You know, government can't provide all these services just by saying that they're here. There are difficulties, and we know the difficulties that arose in relation to, without naming the service, but in relation to a certain service that is rolled out at the moment.
Thank you.